Welcome to the 8th Sunday after Pentecost. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. All is vanity and a chasing after wind. In the name of the God who has set eternity in our hearts. Amen. Every third year in the lectionary cycle, we encounter this Sunday's quote-unquote cheery message from Ecclesiastes, where wise King Solomon reveals the folly and the uselessness of all human endeavor. Round and round goes human life. What has been is what will be, nothing new under the sun. Sounds a little bit like Eeyore. The problem, as the author sees it, is the simple fact that God has set eternity in the human heart. That comes in chapter 3, following our reading. We have a built-in quest for eternity that results in the inevitable contradiction that our reach will always exceed our grasp until we learn to loosen our grip. All three readings this week are denouncing things. All human endeavor in the first reading, greed in Luke's gospel, as we are told to be rich toward God. And in Colossians, we are urged to put to death a host of things. We are enjoined to ask ourselves on what we are basing our life anyway. In that regard, I am glad for Ecclesiastes chapters 1 and 2. I am grateful that God has set eternity in my heart. With eternity in our hearts, we hear the words of our gospel this morning. This very night your life is being demanded of you, and things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Are you rich toward God? What does that mean anyway, to be rich toward God? The truth taught by Ecclesiastes, a truth that came through to me in Tlalpan, Mexico, a half-century ago, is the truth that being rich is about grabbing hold of things, while being rich toward God is about releasing our grip. God has made us so that our reach will always exceed our grasp until we learn to loosen our grip. We either learn to loosen our grip and come to joy before the end of our life, or else one night our life is demanded of us, as in our gospel, and our grip is loosened for us. There is no other way to attain the joy of the eternity that God has put in our hearts. In 1973, I visited the seminary in Tijuana, Baja California, to transfer there for my final semester before ordination in order to solidify my Spanish and to increase my understanding of Latino culture. On that trip, the priest who accompanied me took me to a barrio outside of the city of Tijuana that had essentially sprung up next to the garbage dump of Greater Tijuana. The first thing to notice there was the immense poverty. Nearly naked children playing in the streets, with people eking out a living by scouring through the discards on the mountains of trash nearby. As we entered the neighborhood, people waved at us and came up to the car to say hello. Even a small rent-a-car was not a common sight there. That friendly curiosity was gleeful, and my priest guide explained that their joy was based, at least in part, upon the fact that what people accumulated in their gleanings was not hoarded, but shared. Joy in being with their neighbors and not being walled off from them as in wealthier neighborhoods. What little success was achieved by the gleaners in those outskirts of Tijuana was parceled out to others. That, I came to understand, is the basis of what Jesus calls being rich toward God. I didn't end up transferring to the seminary in Tijuana in my last semester of theology, but rather to the seminary in the outskirts of Mexico City in Tlalpan, where the politicians and industrialists live, quite a well-to-do area. As I got off the bus each morning to walk through the village of Tlalpan to get to the seminary, I observed the homes of the wealthy. They were surrounded by 7-foot-high concrete and stucco walls. The walls were studded with broken glass at the top. Once in a great while, a fancy car would emerge from one of the walled compounds, and although I would wave at people, as I had been accustomed to do during my previous summers in Cuernavaca for language schools, no one waved back, but usually just drove ahead, stone-faced. That's when the stark difference between Tlalpan and the Tijuana Refuse District struck me. These wealthy people were not only not friendly, but they were not apparently very happy. No one waved and no one came up to me as I walked the streets that were filled with fancy homes without visible evidence of being inhabited. The words of Ecclesiastes come to mind, "What do mortals get from all the toil and strain with which they toil under the sun? It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. All is vanity and a chasing after wind." What I've learned in Mexico and in Peru and in poor parishes of the Southwest here is that this text does not really refer to the life of the poor among us. Their life is not to be idealized, for it is very hard. But on the other hand, their life of chasing after enough to eat each day is serious business and not merely a chasing after wind. And while what is achieved by wealthy wind chasing is rarely shared, the occasional success in the struggles of the poor are often shared, knowing that failure the next day will be balanced by another's sharing of their success in the chase some following day. Ironically, perhaps it becomes self-interest to share, something the wealthy fail completely to comprehend. Sharing is self-interest? An oxymoron to the rich. The difference is the understanding that the very poor have that we are in this all together, rather than it's every man for himself. It is the difference in being rich toward oneself and being rich toward the other, which I just may have hinted at before, is being rich toward God, who is the other, always. May all of us come to realize that what is needed most is a sincere desire within to learn how to be rich toward God, and not with stuff, since stuff is vanity and chasing after wind. Stuff owns us. We don't own the stuff, because stuff demands to be taken care of, repaired, guarded, and watched over at all times. Stuff must be surrounded by high walls studded with broken glass. And stuff demands that we be wary of others envying some of our stuff, so it's best to ignore those around us. Being rich toward God requires only that we know how to share and how to live in joyful expectation of the responses of kindness, generosity, and love that can only come from and be inspired by the God who has set eternity in the human heart. Be rich toward God. Be rich toward the other, because the other is, well, you know. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. All is vanity and a chasing after wind. In the name of the God who has set eternity in the human heart. Amen.